I'm a Canadian and I'm not of Aboriginal ancestry, but I've always had a passionate interest in Indigenous cultures. I lived the last 5 years or so in Bolivia, South America, and had some amazing opportunities to connect with the Bolivian people. I loved learning about their customs, their textiles and clothing, their dance, their music, but I realized that the best way to connect with my Bolivian friends was through their Indigenous food. I tried llama, alpaca, quinoa, and lots of Indigenous teas. The Incan and Quechua people always considered the coca plant to be sacred. They chewed its leaves and made tea from it. I lived high up in the mountains, so I drank coca tea many times because it made me feel strong and gave me lots of energy. It was a wonderful way to connect to Indigenous culture, and it made me wonder, what types of Indigenous foods do we have right here in Canada?
I'm Ojibwe from Pine Creek First Nation in Manitoba. My favorite Indigenous foods growing up were deer meat, also known as jumper, pickerel, and ducks. We also picked Saskatoon berries and sweetgrass at certain times of the year. My favorite childhood memory was how excited I would get when my chumi would go duck hunting. And when he'd return, my cuckoo would prepare the ducks. I remember the smell of singed duck and watching my cuckoo prepare the duck soup. I always enjoyed tearing up little pieces of bannock and putting them in the soup. That's the best way to eat it.
I never realized that I'd have the chance to continue experiencing Indigenous foods once I got back to Canada.
I've tried Indigenous foods in some parts of Canada, but I'd never been to Vancouver Island.
So I was really excited about the opportunity Shianne and I had to visit Suk First Nation on Vancouver Island.
Brendan and I, along with 2 other staff from the Centre for Indigenous Environmental Resources, also known as CEER, went to a digital storytelling workshop about Indigenous foods with the youth of Suk First Nation.
On the first day, the youth and some community members took us on a beach walk to share with us a beautiful spot where they harvest some of their Indigenous foods. And the coolest part was when we dug for clams to have for lunch. We found a spot to move the rocks aside and dig, with our hands, into the mud and pull out handfuls of clams. It was amazing.
Then, we collected water straight from the ocean and boiled the clams over a driftwood fire right on the beach. They were so delicious. And they weren't the only Indigenous foods we had on that trip. While in Suk, we had the opportunity to try smoked salmon. It was so cool watching the community prepare the salmon for the smokehouse.
They have so many great Indigenous foods to choose from. One night we tried Dungeness crab. It took a while to get the meat out, but it was worth all the effort.
On the last day, we hiked through an old growth forest down to the beach. The thing I noticed about all the Indigenous foods that we ate was that they gave us so much energy.
As our plane was leaving Vancouver Island, I was already hoping to have more experiences with Indigenous foods around Canada. There's so many amazing foods to try, stories to tell, and recipes to experiment with. I hope everyone will want to share them.
On the plane ride home to Winnipeg, I thought to myself, I wonder, with all the changes that are happening to our environment, will my sons be able to experience what I had during our visit? I want my sons to grow up knowing that when the earth is healthy, our Indigenous foods thrive, and so do we.